Welcome to Spirits Podcast, a boozy dive into mythology, legends, and folklore. Every week we pour a drink and learn about a new story from around the world. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Julia.
In this episode 297, Magic Babies.
Yeah, Amanda, so because we are of a certain age now,
yes,
which I hate saying that, but here we are, I have been spending a lot more time with babies and new parents, which I know you have a pretty large family, both close and extended. But as an only child and as someone who is like pretty close in age with all of my cousins, I did not spend a lot of time growing up with babies.
Yeah, I am the oldest of 4 kids, and I am 6 or 7 years older than the youngest 2, who are twins. So growing up, I did a lot of baby rearing, and there were a lot of baby cousins around me. Caring for babies has always been a part of my life, though now as an adult, my friends are starting to have babies for the first time, and it feels different to be like, wow, what a person who resembles you as a person, versus as a child, I was like, oh, a creature I have to keep not yelling, and that was more how I related to them.
A creature I have to care for. Oh, no.
Yes.
A lot of my friends, like you said, and at least on my husband's side of the family, his cousins and stuff like that are starting to become parents. While I'm not personally sure if parenthood is in the cards for me, I have been thinking a lot about pregnancy and birth. And as I usually do, I have been thinking about it through the lens of mythology and folklore.
Oh, Julia, has something about the world really politicized pregnancy recently?
Yeah, both of that and just because I am almost 30 now and people have been asking when I'm going to have kids for the past 4 years of my life. Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot.
Lots of reasons.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, a lot of stories about babies and pregnancies are about these fantastic or monstrous births, which makes sense because this is mythology after all, and mythology likes to handle things that are about humanity by telling stories about it.
Of course, and it is both magical and mundane, just the daily work of making, birthing, and raising children. So it makes sense that mythology would both seize on something really mundane and ritualize it or make it fantastical, because things that are mundane are important to humanity, but also where changes and aberrations and ways in which that's unexpected is definitely a fertile site, if you will, for mythology and folklore.
Absolutely. And a big reason that I want to talk about this through the lens of mythology and folklore is because I know that for myself and for a lot of people out there, we have questions about pregnancy because there's almost a taboo about talking about the effect that both pregnancy and parenthood have on a person. And it's something that somewhat comforts me in that these stories kind of address some of that taboo, especially through the lens of mythology. So knowing that this is going to be the topic of our conversation this week, and we're going to be talking a lot about birth and pregnancy and infertility, I know this might not be the episode for everyone, especially given everything that's happening in the world. So if you want to skip this one, I totally understand. I think it's a really interesting topic, but if you're not in the place to listen to it right now, that's okay. So let's get started. So we have talked about these kind of mythological births before on the show. They are a hallmark of fairy tales, for instance. Tatterhood is a great example in which her conception and birth are both magical and fantastical. What we're not going to be referring to in this episode are these kind of ableist ideas that any sort of birth or infant born with complications or congenital disorders or disability at birth, we're not talking about that in a sort of monstrous way, right?
Good.
So in the real world, no baby is a monster, right? And as we've discussed in past episodes, especially with our Hephaestus episode, for example, there is a lot of ableism in the real world around disability at birth. But when we're examining these stories in particular, I want to point out that not all of these births or pregnancies are portrayed as monstrous. Births that are different from the norm, quote unquote, the norm, are in some stories just children who look a bit different or have happy endings and are loved by their parents or their caretakers. And many of these stories will use quote unquote monster as shorthand for different. But as we've learned anything from this podcast, monster does not mean bad or evil. It often just means other. So as we visit these stories, just a reminder that there is nothing wrong with other.
I think that's fabulous and brings to mind, too, our episode on disability in fairy tales with Amanda Leduc, which really opened my mind, too, to how fairy tales and folklore, religion, the stories we tell ourselves as society, what it paints as expected and what it paints as different or unexpected. And I love that my view of the world is a lot more curious and a lot more acute after having done almost 300 of these dang episodes with you, Julia.
I'm glad, Amanda. That makes me happy. And it's not only the stuff that you and I get to talk about, but the fact that we get to talk to incredible experts and people from various fields and life experiences makes me very happy. So to get us started, we're going to specifically be talking about creatures or infants that are born to at least one human parent. So we're basically eliminating creatures that were born to already non-human creatures, such as Grendel and Grendel's mother, for instance.
Sure.
We're also specifically talking about babies that were born as creatures or quote unquote monsters, rather than like an infant that was transformed later.
That makes sense.
So this leaves us with 4 categories, and the categories are very fun.
I love the methodology of this episode, Julia.
Shout out to our researcher for this episode, Sally. It's great. It's a lot of fun. It was so much fun creating this episode.
I'm so excited. And Sally is a parent, right?
Yes, Sally is a parent.
Right on.
So our 4 categories are babies of unusual size, either tiny or giant.
Yay.
Plant or often specifically vegetable babies.
Tell me more.
You'll find out more. Quote unquote, true monster babies, which we'll be talking about, for example, the Minotaur in that section.
Right.
And then, quote unquote, devil babies, who are very specifically aligned with Christianity and are usually the literal, quote unquote, spawn of Satan.
Sure.
So let's start with my favorite section, which is babies of unusual size.
I love this. Oh, so sweet. I love my big babies. I love my little babies.
So the first story is the story of Thumbling, which is from the Brothers Grimm, first collected in 1819. The story begins with a poor peasant who sat with his wife one evening by the hearth of their fire. He's poking at the fire, his wife is weaving, and the man turns to his wife and says, "How sad it is that we have no children. With us all is so quiet, and in other houses it is noisy and lively."
I mean, yes, that does characterize multiple children as noise.
"Yes," the wife replied and sighed, "even if we had only one and it were quite small and only as big as a thumb, I should be quite satisfied and we would still love it with all our hearts."
Oh, folklore. Gotta love it.
So now what happens is the woman falls ill and then 7 months later gives birth to a child that was perfect in all of its limbs, but no longer than a thumb.
Oh.
And then they go on to say, "It is as we wished it to be, and it shall be our dear child."
Oh, adorable.
So they named the child, as one would imagine, Thumbling. Really creative in the naming there. And the child is described as a quote-unquote wise and nimble creature.
That won't lead to any problems at school, I'm sure.
It says that he is loved by his parents and raised as they would raise any other child. Again, there's like that ableist kind of like, of course you would raise this child as any other child. It is just a child. It's just a small child.
Exactly. And once you tune into these kinds of implications of overcompensation for disability, being like, look how virtuous these parents are that they loved their child, like it really illuminates a lot. And I encourage you to keep noticing that, because that really helps you understand when and exactly what society thinks of disabled people. And it's worth noticing.
Yeah. So as I read these stories, keep in mind, we are looking through that lens being like, man, that sucks and is ableist, but continuing on. So eventually he sets out on a series of adventures when he's old enough, leaving his parents behind.
Yeah.
And then when he is done with it and has returned back to them after seeing the world, it was like treasured that he returned. They're like, "Oh, our son, he's back. Incredible."
Good. Yeah.
And in this story, it's weird because there's like no real magic other than the mother saying like, "Oh, I would love a child even if he was no bigger than a thumb." And that's what came to pass. For some context to this story and a couple of other ones that we'll tell in this section, the context as to why these stories tend to be tied to things that the mother does or thinks or says, especially in these European and Western stories that we'll be telling, in particular in fairy tale births, it was the belief at the time that the maternal mindset and imagination could influence the formation of the fetus in the womb.
I both really sympathize with pregnant people who are like, man, a lot's out of my control. Man, I really want to do everything I can to hope and expect that I have some control over this outcome, because so much related to pregnancy and birth and also raising kids is not in your control. And also, man, does society really police the bodies of pregnant people and blame things that have no cause, blame, or even reason to be upset in all cases, like on the people who are pregnant, as if you can just kind of like have the money and time and desire to put your entire life on hold and like only drink the milk of like a virgin goat or whatever, as a way to like secure your pregnancy, which just, any time that there is stuff outside our control, whether it is weather, illness, birth, we are like, damn, I will do whatever I can to take control over this thing and blame people who I think could have done something else. Like it is such a human urge, and it is so fucked up.
Yeah, and we were doing that since at least the medieval period. So that's cool, I guess. An author, Marie-Helene Huet, in her book, which was called Monstrous Imagination, sums up this kind of really patriarchal concept that many of these fairy tale stories reflect. And here's the quote. Instead of reproducing the father's image as nature commands, the monstrous child bore witness to the violent desire that moved the mother at the time of conception or during pregnancy. The resulting offspring carried the marks of her whims and fancy rather than the recognizable features of the legitimate genitor.
Oh boy.
The monster thus erased paternity and proclaimed the dangerous power of the female imagination.
I mean, that's the rub, right? Like, that is the patriarchal nightmare of, I have subdued a woman through marriage and financial control. That is the sort of ultimate, like, cuckolding and threat to masculinity, is the idea of, like, the changeling in the home, or the imposter. And it's, like, proof of how your toxic masculinity wasn't upheld.
Yeah.
And that blows.
And this idea that like, oh, well, I can never prove that this baby was my baby. Brr, 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 brr. Oh, patriarchy, you're a mess.
Yeah, that's where slut shaming comes from. It's men being afraid of infidelity. And oh boy.
So, Amanda, a lot of these stories did exist in the West and in Europe, but of course, they're not exclusive to those areas. There is the story of the isamboshi, which is a Japanese folktale that was published between the 14th and 16th century. In this story, another childless couple went to a shrine and prayed that they would have a child, quote, no matter how small. There's a lot of like, it doesn't matter how small this baby is. I want a baby. So they were blessed with their child, Isambushi, which means one son boy, which in this time frame, son was a measurement which was about 3 centimeters.
Oh, okay.
So in the story, they kind of describe him as being no larger than a fingertip.
Like an imperial inch or so.
Exactly. Much like with Thumbling, he was raised lovingly by his parents. And when he grew older, he, again, like Thumbling, set out to seek his fortune and see the world.
Aw, charming. I hope they make a little like adventurers league of wee men.
Wouldn't that be adorable? I would love that so much.
Right?
So eventually he comes to a household, like a royal household with a beautiful daughter who he becomes the escort for. However, one day when they are out visiting a different temple, the daughter is stolen by an ogre. When Isambushi tries to stop him, the ogre swallows him up.
Oh, okay.
However, Isambushi, with his little needle sword, did I mention that he has a cool little needle sword? Because he does.
Adorable, like Arya.
Exactly. So he stabs the ogre's belly from within, and the creature spits him back out and flees. And the ogre, in fleeing, leaves behind a magical hammer, which Isambushi claims, and like basically uses it to make himself 6 feet tall.
Righteous.
Love
it.
So he marries the daughter and lives happily ever after with his wife and his family, and brings his family along for the ride as well.
Oh.
There's also an additional variation of this tale, which is called Mameske, or Bean Boy, which is basically the same story, but his birth is he was born of a swelling in his mother's thumb the size of a bean.
Bean Boy!
Bean Boy! We love Bean Boy.
Yes, we do.
So as much as we love these small lads and their little adventuring squad that they should form together, there were also some giant babies as well, or at least children that grew at an extremely fast pace.
Hooray!
One of my favorites is one that we've actually spoken about before, which are the giant twin sons of Poseidon, who were Otis and Ephialtes, who you might remember, they were the ones that trapped Ares in a jar and then tried to kidnap and marry Artemis, who eventually slew them both.
Iconic.
So their birth story was that their mother was Iphimedeia, who was a mortal woman who was in love with Poseidon. Every day she would go to the ocean, sit on the shore, and pour seawater into her lap. And eventually she just became pregnant after pouring that seawater into her lap every day.
You know what, Julia? I heard similar rumors in middle school when I got told that if I went to a water park, I would surely get a UTI. And I feel like it's like, oh, if you swim in a public pool, you could get pregnant.
Oof, yeah. I mean, I think that was the intention for her, at least. And I think for most of those urban legends, that's probably not anyone's intention. But yeah, I see you.
It makes me laugh.
So eventually she became pregnant. And when she gave birth to the twins, they were said to grow by 9 fingers every 9 months, which I don't know.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I guess. So that's like 2 hands, basically.
A little faster than normal.
Every 9 months, that gets pretty big. I feel like that's
pretty fast. Okay.
By the time they're like full adults, that's tall, you know?
I'm here like holding my hands apart. But yeah, I mean, for that to continue past the age of, 10 would be a lot.
So they're also a really interesting addition to this category. And giants in mythology in general are, because most giants are born to giants rather than to mortals. But this is another example of kind of a woman taking control of her own pregnancy, much like in our first 2 stories, bearing children through, for lack of a better phrase, visualization.
Yeah, they manifested their pregnancy, which is a whole fucked up section of Instagram, by the way, but that's not what we're dwelling on today.
No, we're not doing that. Much like I told Eric Silver recently, you gotta hit the not interested button on those Instagram stories and just get rid of them all.
100%.
So I think that we'll notice like this kind of visualization, the parent who becomes pregnant, that whole thing influencing the way that the pregnancy shakes out is a pretty common through line of these stories that is not just reserved to children of unusual sizes.
Yeah, no, and I totally empathize with why. I have read so many moving accounts of people who so badly want to make a thing happen, and it feels like, you do anything in your power and you just can't. And also it's mad fucked up when we put medical outcomes on people's personal responsibility.
Yep, 100%. 100%. We got to stop doing that. It sucks.
But Julia, then how would we sell them teas that we claim, help fertility outcomes?
I don't know. Sell them a tea that does something else. I would love a tea that, like, when I get all gassy, stops me from being gassy. That would be great.
Hey, Julia, mint licorice. That's the tea for you.
Yeah.
I use it all the time. Delicious.
I just wish it was a little bit more instant. You know what I mean?
Yes. No, me too.
So this leads us to our second category of baby, which are plant babies.
Tell me about these plant babies and not just the ones that I raise.
Yeah. So there are 2 that stand out to me in this category. There are a lot of plant babies, but these are my 2 favorites. So the pumpkin Cinderella, which is a Persian folktale, and the Italian fairy tale, the Apple Girl.
Oh, tell me more.
The pumpkin Cinderella begins in a very similar way to what we've seen before, which is a woman who is desperate for a child and proclaims, "I want a little girl. I don't care if she looks like a pumpkin." Incredible.
Sure.
And then 9 months later, that same woman either gives birth to a little girl and then one day looks in the baby's bed and sees a pumpkin, or just straight up gives birth to a pumpkin.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a twist.
In either event, her husband abandons her. Bad, shitty parent. And she just continues to raise the pumpkin as a child despite the derision of her community. So she takes the pumpkin out with her. She rolls it beside her when she goes about her day. She even sends the pumpkin to school to learn, which is very sweet. I love that.
Oh.
And then one day, a merchant's son who's also attending the school decides to follow the pumpkin in secret because he's like, what's up with this pumpkin? And as he does so, he sees that a little door opens in the pumpkin's side and a beautiful girl steps out of the pumpkin.
Oh my God.
So he falls in love instantly, as is classic kind of folktale, fairy tale.
Sure.
And he sees that a ring that the girl was wearing in her human form falls off her finger. He takes the ring, very similar to both fairy tales like Cinderella and Donkey Skin, and he says that he will only marry the girl whose finger fits the ring. Natch.
Classic.
All in the land try on the ring, but of course it fits no one. And so he goes to the home of the pumpkin girl. When he says why he's there, a hand emerges from the pumpkin. He slips the ring on the finger and the ring fits perfectly.
Charming.
The merchant's son then insists that he will marry the pumpkin, again to the ridicule of the entire town. They are married. He takes his pumpkin bride far away, quote, where he cared for her and never allowed anyone to laugh at her. One night, the door of the pumpkin opened and a beautiful girl stepped out. And he goes, how could this be? Like, what's happening? Why are you finally a lady again? And she smiled and told him, quote, your love has set me free. Only because you loved me as a pumpkin could the spell be broken.
Adorable.
Very sweet, right? Again, like a classic kind of fairy tale story in that all of the beats we have seen before in various other forms. But I just like that it's a pumpkin.
I really like that it's a pumpkin as well.
Our next fruit/vegetable child/plant child is the Apple Girl, which is a story from Italy where a childless king and queen wish for a baby. There's a lot of that. One day the queen wondered aloud, quote, why can I not bear children the way an apple tree produces apples?
Yeah, I bet that's really resonant for a lot of people looking around, being like, how the fuck is this so easy for other people? And it's hard not to personalize that.
Yeah. And again, this is what I was talking about, too, about kind of pregnancy and taboo. We don't talk about infertility very often among quote unquote polite company. You know what I mean? We don't talk about the struggles that people go through in order to get pregnant. And if they're looking to keep a baby, like have a viable pregnancy that ends in a birth, you know what I mean? So a lot of these stories, again, I was talking about looking at these through the lens of fairy tales and folklore and mythology. A lot of these stories deal with that, where it's like, it's not always easy to have a child when you want to have a child.
Yeah. And complete sort of different emotional journey, but similar realization. The more like Victorian and Regency, like historical novels and romances that I read, the more I realize how very much having legitimate issue, in quotes, getting married to somebody, you know, acceptable and having children that you can proclaim as blood relatives to the father in the scenario, how much it's an economic requirement and how a woman's worth is directly tied to her fertility. And anything that complicates that, any kind of whisper of illegitimacy of affairs, things like that, directly threatens kind of a man's economic place, and not to mention his masculinity. So it's so high stakes, impossibly high stakes, like the highest stake thing possible.
Yeah, absolutely. At least for this queen, she wonders aloud why she can't give birth to a child like an apple tree. And then, of course, as these stories go, as we've seen them go, soon enough, she becomes pregnant and gave birth. But she gave birth to an apple, the most exceptionally beautiful apple anyone had ever seen.
Oh,
it was the perfect apple, Amanda.
Oh, all right.
So it was so beautiful that the king displayed this lovely apple on a tray of gold on his balcony.
I really didn't see this twist coming, Julia. I gotta tell you.
Yeah, no, you're just like, oh, it's just an apple. All right. So one day, another king is passing through the kingdom and saw on the king's balcony a lovely woman combing her hair.
Okay.
But when she saw that this other king had spotted her, she flees, dives into the apple, and disappears.
Oh.
However, that visiting king, having seen her once, already in love with her. Naturally.
Sure. And when a king is in love with a person, God forbid you try to stand in their way.
Yes. So he begs the king and queen to give him the apple, and eventually they relent and like, okay, yes, you can have this beautiful apple of ours. Fine. He brings the apple back to his own kingdom, where he lived with his stepmother in his palace. He places the apple in his chambers, lays it out like in a golden fruit bowl. He lays out a comb, a glass of water for her. And then every morning she would emerge from the fruit to comb her hair, but she never spoke. She never ate, nothing like that. The stepmother, because naturally the stepmother is always the villain in these kind of stories.
Yeah.
She begins to grow suspicious of how much time the king was spending in his chambers, which, okay, sure. And so when the king is out and had left the apple with his like most trustworthy servant, the stepmother sneaks into the king's room. She sees the apple and out of spite and kind of just being like, you're spending all your time in the room because of this gorgeous apple, she stabs it with a small dagger.
Ah!
And then immediately the apple begins to bleed red blood out of the stab wound that just happened there, which frightens the stepmother, who runs away.
Yeah. I mean, all this is predictable based on the actions.
So the servant returns. He panics because he, this is the king's apple and also now it's bleeding. And luckily, he has an aunt who knows magic. So he goes to her and she provides a magical powder that he sprinkles on the apple's wounds. And the apple then splits open. The apple girl emerges covered in bandages, which I think is a great touch to the story. That like the magic powder just kind of bandaged her up. Incredible. When the king returns, he finds her there and she tells him that she had been under a spell and that his stepmother had tried to kill her, which is not great.
Yeah.
And the apple girl marries the king. The stepmother flees the kingdom. The newlyweds move closer to the apple girl's former home to spend more time with her parents. Happily ever after.
Damn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
There's a lot going on in that one.
There is a lot going on. I also like, man, I have on my mind, Julie, the thing you brought up earlier of like, it shouldn't be kind of a reward that loving a child that is unusual means that you get a usual child at the end of it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a real kind of like part of the allure of fairy tales is transformation. And so often any situation where, you know, you love someone and they turn out to be rich, or you love them ugly and they turn out beautiful, like it's as if, you know, you get rewarded for being a virtuous person where you don't have to like fulfill the promise that you made to love the person as they are. And I don't think that invalidates these fairy tales. Are still important to people. They're still worth studying. But it's a theme that I'm really noticing right now.
I think that's really interesting. And it was something that I was going to talk about a little bit later, but now's a great time to talk about it as well.
Oh, I did it again.
No, it's great. A lot of these stories, I feel, are told from the perspective of caretakers of disabled people, rather than the perspective of disabled people themselves. And so they want to think, well, as long as I do the thing that I'm supposed to do, I'll be rewarded for it at the end. Rather than like being a caretaker for any sort of person should be reward enough because that person should be an important aspect of your life and is a full-fledged person in themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And burnout among caregivers is such a real thing because at least here in the US, we don't live in a state that supports child rearing, caregiving, aging, any of the stuff that require, like, we don't support and valorize anybody except somebody who's completely self-sufficient, completely normative in all the things that our society holds important and generates wealth for themselves and nobody else. Like that's who we think is worthy of care. And oops, it's someone who doesn't require any care. And so I both, again, totally empathize with why you might be so kind of unsupported and burned out that you develop a fantasy of, you know, what if this actually wasn't a thing that was on my plate? And also, we need to step in and support people before burnout, before abuse, before any of those things, you know, like that we see where that leads and consistent untreated burnout, you know, goes somewhere that we don't want to be. And again, why it's so important to have paid caregiving, paid universal basic income, you know, paid childcare, all these kinds of things. It's not a academic issue, and it's not a policy issue. And it's not a thing where it's like, my dad votes for this candidate because of taxes. Like, it's all related, and it is so deeply baked into our culture and our folklore. I know this is a podcast where we talk about ghosts and also capitalism, but like that, it really relates. And I think these are all kind of like blowing my mind smallly, over and over again as we talk about it.
I get you. The last thing I want to point out for our plant babies is that in these stories in particular, the idea of, quote, bearing fruit feels very literal in terms of pregnancy and childbearing. And in these stories, we see the plant child has the ability to leave her fruit casing behind, typically when it's time for her to marry and become a bearer of children herself.
There you go, Julia.
Which I think is really interesting and also a little on the nose. Come on, fairy tales.
A little on the nose. Come on, guys.
All right, so we're going to explore some of the more monstrous, I guess, and again, monstrous does not mean bad, side of these fantastic babies. But first, we are going to grab a refill.
Let's do it.
Hey, it's Julia. Welcome to the refill. I have those pops, you know, the ones you had when you were little kids in the plastic sleeve that you just would eat only in summertime because they really only taste good during the summertime. I've got a bunch of those. We also have a bunch of new patrons, Josh, Jessica, and Evil Eve L. I hope that's how you pronounce that. They join the ranks of our incredible supporting producer level patrons like Alicia, Ann, Brittany, Daisy, Fruity Chick, Hannah, Jack Marie, Jane, Jessica Kinzer, Jessica Stewart, Nieselkins, Lily, Little Vomit Spiders Running Around, Megan Moon, Phil Fresh, Rico Like, Captain Jonathan Malachi Cosmos, Sarah, Scott, and Zazie, and of course our legend level patrons. Ariana, Audra, Bex, Chibi Yokai, Clara, Iron Havoc, Morgan, Mother of Vikings, Sarah, Schmitty, and BME Up Scotty. Whenever they get the variety packs of those ice pops that you have only in the summer and they only taste good in the summer, they always get one extra of the flavor that's their favorite. That's how you know. It's magic, baby. And you could also get that same magic by going to patreon.com/spiritspodcast. And not only can you get some cool magic where you get extra of the thing that you like, but you also get extra of the thing you like if that thing is Hometown Urban Legends episodes. You can sign up and get one extra Urban Legends episode every month. Check it out. It's at patreon.com/spiritspodcast. I know it's August and therefore it's not quite spooky season yet, but I was outside and I did see the first Spirit Halloween start going into a local mall near me. And so I'm on my horror movie kick, and I'm going to recommend for you today Prey on Hulu. It is the newest movie in the Predator franchise, which is one that I don't hold near and dear to my heart, but I do enjoy those movies. And I have to say, this is the best Predator movie I've seen since the original. Absolutely check it out. Watch it in the Comanche dub, which is incredible in and of itself. You're gonna love it. It is so, so much fun. It's also a beautiful horror movie, which there's not a lot of those in the world. I'm also here to tell you that Spirits isn't the only podcast on the Multitude Network, and I think that you would really like listening to Games and Feelings. Games and Feelings is an advice podcast about games. You can join Question Keeper Eric Silver and a revolving cast of guests, myself and Amanda included, as they answer your questions at the intersection of fun and humanity since, you gotta play games with other people. We're talking all types of games, video games, tabletop games, party games, laser tag, escape rooms, game streams, D&D podcasts. All of that stuff that you could possibly think of. Have you ever tried to convince people who have only played Monopoly to play a new board game that you grabbed from the game store? Is an escape room a good third date? What makes a video game cozy, and do they have recommendations? They answer any and all questions as long as they're games related. And if you would like to hear more and want to level up your emotional intelligence stat, which I know I'm always looking to level that up, you can subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes every other Friday. And now we're going to take a breather and hear from some of our sponsors. And I want you to focus for a moment. How are you feeling? How are things going? If your answer was anything less than amazing, I want to help you because our partners at Calm have the tools you need to feel your best. Calm is the #1 mental wellness app, and it gives you the tools you need to improve the way you feel. You can reduce stress and anxiety through guided meditations. You can improve your focus with curated music tracks. And you can rest and recharge with Calm's imaginative sleep stories, which Amanda and I both love and are great for both children and adults. They also have these daily movement sessions, which are designed to help relax your body and uplift your mind. And I love starting my mornings off with those. And over 100 million people around the world use Calm to take care of their minds. They are ready to help you stress less, sleep more, and live a happier, healthier life. For listeners of the show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/spirits. Go to calm.com/spirits for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/spirits. We are also sponsored by DoorDash, and you should be ordering all of your summer essentials with Dash Pass by DoorDash. It is a great way to get everything you need. And during the summer of Dash Pass, you can save money and access members-only offers that will help you feel easy and breezy all summer long. With 0 delivery fees, exclusive items, and more than 25,000 members-only offers nationwide, Dash Pass by DoorDash has everything you need to make your summer memorable. You can save an average of $4 to $5 on every order you place for delivery or pickup. That means on average, DashPass pretty much pays for itself when you order just twice a month. So right now, during DoorDash's Summer of Dash Pass, you can get 50% off your first order up to a $15 value. Use the promo code SPIRITS at checkout when you spend $12 or more. That's 50% off your first order up to a $15 value when you sign up for DoorDash during Summer of Dash Pass using promo code SPIRITS. Don't forget, that's code SPIRITS for 50% off your first order up to a $15 value. Dash Pass benefits only on eligible orders that meet the minimum subtotal. Terms apply. It is hot out there in the summer, and sometimes I just feel so sticky. You probably know what I'm talking about, but you know the right bra can take your summer fits to the next level? You can upgrade your summer top drawer with a Third Love bra for every occasion, like their best-selling 24/7 t-shirt bra, their Form wireless, their unlined, their strapless styles. These new limited edition styles and colors work with any outfit, so your boobs always look their best. Personally, I love their fitting room quiz. I find it super easy. And every time they tell me like, hey, this might fit you better, I'm kind of blown away that they know my body so well. And I really like that they have the half-sized cups because that kind of blew my mind as well. Like, I never realized why my bras weren't fitting me exactly the right way. And it's because one size was a little too small and one size was a little too big. And they helped me realize that with the half cup sizes. And the best part is you are going to love your fit guaranteed. If not, exchanges and returns are free for 60 days, and Third Love's team of expert fit stylists is available to answer any and all of your questions. So feeling is believing. Give your boobs the 24/7 comfort and support that you deserve. Upgrade your bra today and get 20% off your first order at thirdlove.com/spirits. That's 20% at thirdlove.com/spirits. And now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. There are a lot of ways to support a healthy brain. You could learn a new language, you could take power naps, but also an easy way is BetterHelp Online Therapy. There's nothing that makes your brain feel like it is being taken care of than going to therapy. And BetterHelp is an incredibly easy and convenient way of getting therapy. It offers video, phone, and even live chat only therapy sessions. So you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. And I have a lot of camera anxiety, so this super helps out. And it is also much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. It's also really easy to change your therapist, which in the real world is not the case. And BetterHelp takes that experience in mind and makes it really easy for you to find what works best for you. So our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/spirits. That's betterhelp.com/spirits. And now, let's get back to the show. Moving on to some more interesting babies, Amanda, now that we have our refills in hand. Hans My Hedgehog is another folktale collected by the Grimm brothers, this time from Germany. And once again, there is a couple without children. This time it's the husband that wishes for a child, even if they look like a hedgehog.
Oh my.
And as we've seen with all of these stories, naturally, this wife gives birth to a child that is a hedgehog, but only from the waist up.
Oh, that's not the combination I thought would be.
Yeah. So from the waist down, lower half boy.
Huh.
Upper half hedgehog.
Feels like the worst possible combo.
I'm just trying to think. I feel like the worst possible combo would be like hedgehog back and hedgehog face. And then boy body.
That's just an anamorph, Julia. We know what that is.
Okay, fair enough. So unlike Thumbling and those other versions that we've seen thus far, there is disappointment and neglect on the part of the parents. There's no actual abuse, but they sort of just allow him to stay in their home and try not to interact with him.
Yeah, that also sucks. That's not what you owe your kids.
Yes, exactly. So eventually, the hedgehog boy, whose name is Hans, goes out into the world and goes on his series of fairy tale adventures, which leads to him getting betrothed to a princess and becoming a steadfast servant to her father.
Okay.
After he has kind of proven himself as a loyal member of the household, he then is like able to shed his hedgehog skin and appears as a quote unquote normal man. Hans, now a prince, inherits the kingdom, and eventually he returns to the home of his old family and tells them that he is their son. However, they're like, we don't have a son. I mean, we did once, but he was born with quills like a hedgehog, and then he left. And Hans is like, hey, that's me. And the father rejoices, and they return back to his new kingdom with their son, which again, I don't think they deserve that ending.
Very magnanimous of Hans, yes.
It's very kind of him. He didn't have to do that.
Yes. Hans, if you flourished on your own with your father-in-law who loved you as you are and never thought of your parents again, no one will blame you.
Now, naturally, Amanda, if we are going to talk about some quote-unquote monstrous babies, we have to talk about Asterion or Asterius, aka the Minotaur.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll probably recognize the imagery of the Minotaur, even if you don't know the origins of the Greek figure. He is half man, half bull. He is born of the wife of King Minos of Crete, Pasiphae. Despite the fact that the Minotaur is named after Minos, Minos was not the father. Rather, Poseidon, as an act of revenge against Minos after he refused to sacrifice a pure white bull to the sea god, Poseidon struck Pasiphae with an overwhelming sexual desire for that bull.
A real making women's desires into punishments or jokes.
Yep, that's a Greek mythology for you, huh?
Yep.
So she goes to the famous master craftsman in service of her husband, Daedalus, who you might remember from the story of Icarus, or even as later on the creator of the labyrinth. Daedalus crafts her a wooden frame of a cow, which Pasiphae climbs into, and it's wheeled out near the bull, and then ... 9 months later, the Minotaur was born.
Sure.
The Minotaur is immediately hungry for flesh, and as Virgil puts it, quote, a memorial of unspeakable love.
Oh.
Which I don't think that's a compliment from Virgil, unfortunately.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Also, a kind of like you pointed out, a classic Greek mythology example of a woman being punished for the misdeeds of her husband.
Mm-hmm.
However, it should be noted that Pasiphae was the one that named the Minotaur Asterion or Asterius, which means starry one. And in some art, she is shown as being a very loving mother to Asterion before Minos banishes the creature to the labyrinth.
Wow.
I was also reading something very interesting, separate kind of from the research that was done for this episode, where much like Medusa is used as a modern symbol for people who have suffered sexual assault, Asterius or Asterion is used as a symbol for disabled people who have suffered abuse by their caretakers or their parents.
I see a lot of through lines there. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I really like that. Again, we've talked about this a lot in mythology, but the idea of being able to take these figures and apply them to the modern sense and feel like we're being seen in mythology, I think is really, really important. And I'm glad that Asterius is used as a figure in that sense.
That's amazing. And I hope if that's something that resonates with you, you're able to find community among people who claim Asterius for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Next, we are going to move over to China and the story of Pai Lung, the white dragon. The story begins with a young woman who is living with her parents. During a violent storm, she answers the door to their home and invites an old man that she finds there inside for shelter from that storm.
Oh no, better not be punished for your hospitality here.
Oh, of course she is, because when he leaves the next morning, she discovers that she is pregnant, and the family, furious, kicks her out of their home.
Yeah. This is just hitting my bingo card, Julia, of folklore here.
It always does. So when she eventually delivers the child, it is nothing more than a kind of ball of white flesh, which appears to her to be lifeless at the time. And so she, in sorrow, throws it into the water nearby.
Sure.
The moment it hits the water, it transforms into a beautiful white dragon. But the transformation terrifies the girl so much that she dies of fright.
Oh no, not dying of fright.
The classic dying of fright, naturally. Imagine going through pregnancy and then having all that happen to you, and then dying of fright because a giant dragon appears to you.
Damn.
In that moment where she dies of fright, a great storm gathered around the dragon, and his grief for his mother's death unleashes a violent storm. The dragon then flies away, the young girl is buried, and her grave becomes a shrine where she is worshipped as the mother of the white dragon.
Okay, there's something. I'd still rather women live, full lives without pregnancies foisted on them and then dying of fright when a pregnancy does not result how they think. But this is a good second.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that she ends up being worshipped, but I'm sure she probably would have liked to have, like you said, lived a full life and not died.
Yeah.
Speaking of other dragon children, we can talk about a story from Oceania, which is the story of Walatahunga. So Waltahanga, whose name means 8 fathoms or depths, is said to be a giant serpent who was born of a human mother and father. The mother, fearing what her husband would do if she saw their serpent child, tried to hide her away, but eventually he found out and he cut Waltahanga into 8 pieces.
Oh.
After he did that, it rained for 8 days straight, and on the 8th day, the body of Waltahanga reformed, and she began to eat people of the village.
Okay, that's a predictable consequence.
Mm-hmm. So she is caught again. The men of the village come together to catch her again. They chop her up again, and this time she is cooked into a stew that was eaten by everyone in the village except for 2 people. In some stories, this is 2 women. In others, it is a mother and a child.
Julia, does she kill them all by bursting forth from their stomachs and reassembling?
Not quite, but that's a great idea. I love that. So what remains of the stew and the bones are dumped into the ocean, where Waltahanga reforms again at the bottom of the sea.
There you go.
In her revenge, she sends 8 waves to the island where the village was destroyed, destroying everything except the 2 people that did not eat the stew.
Right on.
She returns to the island and then looks at these 2 people, either the mother and the child or these 2 women, and she's like, thank you for not participating in this, and becomes the protector of these 2 survivors by giving them the gift of clean drinking water and the coconut tree.
Oh, yeah.
Which I really, really like that one.
Yeah. Rock on.
Revenge, baby. We love a revenge story.
Of course we do.
So, interestingly, with these monster babies, quote unquote monster babies, these births are usually some sort of punishment, either from a divinity, like in the case of the Minotaur, or from a societal expectation that was broken, such as with the white dragon.
Yes.
And just as the conceptions and the births vary, so does the treatment of the children that are a result. So some are cared for by one parent, but not the other. Some are the cause of their parent's death, and some are simply tolerated.
Yeah.
Which is definitely a different angle and approach than the stories that we told earlier.
And hey, a reason that shouldn't be political for allowing abortion, birth control, and fertility treatments to be a person's free choice, because it sure isn't the fault of any child born what the circumstances of their conception and birth were.
Absolutely.
And it's fucked up to put kids in that situation and to make kids come to the world whose parents couldn't control the circumstances of their birth. And that doesn't lead to treating kids better or making society stronger.
Absolutely. 100%. So we're going to finish our roundup here with the last category of kids, which I feel like has become very popular in movies and television in the modern day, which are devil babies. I am only going to hit one in particular because it is my personal favorite, but I'll mention a few others, which are Robert the Devil from Normandy, France, the film Rosemary's Baby, and basically just any modern retelling of the Antichrist. The Omen, for example, is one that comes to mind.
No, it's a whole subgenre.
It super is. But the one that I chose probably could fall under our last category as well because of its monstrous appearance, but because of its origins, we're going to categorize it as a devil baby, and that's the Jersey Devil.
Really?
Yeah. So now we've mentioned the Jersey Devil on the show before, but in case you haven't heard of it, it is a kangaroo-like creature with the face of a horse, the head of a dog, bat-like wings, horns, and a tail. And it is said to occupy the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey. But I really kind of am interested in the origins of the Jersey Devil and how it supposedly came to be, and that is why it's going to be categorized in this category. So the story goes that on a dark and stormy night, of course, in 1735, a woman named Jane Leeds, often referred to simply as Mother Leeds, was in labor giving birth to her 13th child. There are various versions as to what happens during the birth. Some say she called out that she wanted the baby to be the devil, and so it was born with a tail and wings and hooves and flew right up the chimney when it was born. Others say that it was born as a human child and then changed into the Jersey Devil. Another version of the story, which is dated later, says that a town put a curse on a girl after she fell in love with a British soldier during the Revolutionary War. And when she gave birth, it was the Jersey Devil.
Notice how children who don't look exactly as you expect are perfect blank receptacles for any worry society has.
Exactly. A lot of the versions of the story basically suggest that the mother lets in the devil into her home to corrupt the child, which places the blame firmly on the mother in all the versions of the story.
Of course.
Again, naturally. So that's the story of the Jersey Devil. He's just kind of hanging out in the Pine Barrens, causing trouble and mischief and whatnot, and people cite him every once in a while. But basically, the origins of him are like, hey, when ladies let the devil in, their child also becomes a devil. And we're like, yeah, I guess.
Do you know what all of this is also a smokescreen for, Julia? Anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you the number of times that devil children or devil baby is just a insider speak for looks or is Jewish. And it's a rich vein we don't have to go into right now because it's a treatise of its own.
Sure is. Think about it. So, Amanda, I know there was a lot of variety in the stories that we told today, but there is a through line that I wanted to discuss before we finish up, and it's that most of these stories speak to a desire to control the outcome of a pregnancy, like you were talking about earlier, and that is unfortunately very timely right now.
Mm-hmm.
In the stories where it is clear that a parent willed the pregnancy into existence or where the resulting child was a direct result of their actions or choices, the stories are basically trying to tell us as listeners or as readers that we won't and shouldn't make the same mistakes that these characters did.
Yeah.
Like, we will be the ones that follow directions. We're not going to eat both flowers like in Tatterhood. We won't make deals with the devil. We won't step outside of what society expects us to do. But the world is a different one than when these stories were originally told. Like, no one should be punished with a pregnancy that they do not want. And people who do want children should never be uplifted for doing the bare minimum in caring for those children. So these stories might have been told for a certain reason when they were first being told, but I think it's our responsibility as people discussing mythology and folklore to take away a different lesson from them and revisit them today.
100%. And there are a lot of people who would really love to live in a world where they're not responsible for caring for anyone, where people who need different things and need more than the bare minimum society puts out there find lots of blame for reasons why them or their parents, are responsible for their circumstances.
Yeah.
And that's something that, I think, again, like the more we tease out all the ways in which these messages are encoded and reproduced to us, the better chance we have of calling it out and saying, hey, that's, it's kind of messed up. Not just because it's fun to point out when things are messed up, but because it allows us to start identifying and pushing back against those narratives in our own life.
Exactly. And that's kind of why I did want to talk about this topic today, is because we should be pushing back against the quote unquote morals, I guess, these stories are trying to teach us, and be able to look at them and be like, no, that's wrong. And we know better now. And we should learn from those stories, even if those stories aren't telling the lesson that we're actually learning from them.
100%. For everybody who, saw themselves or their thoughts or their worries or way people have treated you in the past, in these stories, man, do I empathize, and do you have a sympathetic ear in us? It's a complex thing that society is really invested in teaching us to uphold the norms, and it sucks and can feel really lonely to start teasing that out, but it is so worthwhile, and you have company as you do, and that company is us.
Yes, and listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for coming on this ride with us, and remember, as always, stay creepy.
Stay cool. Spirits was created by Amanda McLaughlin, Julia Shafini, and Eric Schneider, with music by Kevin MacLeod and visual design by Allison Wakeman.
Keep up with all things creepy and cool by following us at Spirits Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr. We also have all of our episode transcripts, guest appearances, and merch on our website, as well as a form to send us in your urban legends and your advice from folklore questions at spiritspodcast.com.
Join our member community on Patreon, patreon.com/spiritspodcast, for all kinds of behind-the-scenes goodies. Just $1 gets you access to audio extras with so much more, like recipe cards, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic, for every single episode, director's commentaries, real physical gifts, and more.
We are a founding member of Multitude, an independent podcast collective and production studio. If you like Spirits, you will love the other shows that live on our website at multitude.productions.
Above all else, if you liked what you heard today, please text one friend about us. That's the very best way to help keep us growing.
Thanks for listening to Spirits. We'll see you next week.
Bye.